So I woke up the day the first episode of season 3 released, feeling excited and a little nervous. I spent some time journaling to try and work through all of those feelings. And then as I was wrapping up, my 5-year-old walked in and told me that her head hurt and then let out a loud, wet cough. And I was like, okay. Wonder how this is going to go. While I was assessing her to see how she was doing, see if she had a fever, all of those things, I completely forgot about the Instagram post that I was going to share about this first episode. And my launch strategy and all of those things went completely out the window as I was assessing her to see how sick she was, if she could even go to school. And after taking her temperature and confirming that she did indeed have a fever, my entire day was flipped on its head. And my main priority was no longer talking about the first episode of season 3, but taking care of my sweet 5-year-old and making sure that she was feeling okay. Luckily, I'd spent the past month hyping up season 3 and getting people excited about it. I was able to be flexible while still having a successful season 3 launch. And if you can't tell, I'm still a little sick. Being a mom with a podcast can make things a little bit tricky, but not impossible. And the beauty of podcasting is that it is as flexible as you need it to be. Hi, I'm Andy Smiley, your friendly podcast guide. I help you start and launch a podcast that is fun and fulfilling without burning you out. Whether you're just starting or a few years in, I share tips, stories from my own journey, and insights from podcasters I admire. In this episode, I'm analyzing how the launch of season 3 of the Friendly Podcast Guide went last month. What went well, what didn't go so well, and what we can all learn from it. And just as a reminder, at the end of the episode, if you only have the capacity to implement one thing, I'll tell you what that one thing should be so you don't feel overwhelmed trying to figure out where to start. If you want to hear a little bit more about why I think launching your podcast is such a good idea and how to do it, you can listen to the episode that came out earlier this month where I talked about why launching is a great thing for your podcast, and I gave you a strategy to follow for your own podcast launch. I'll link to the episode in the show notes. I'm going to start with the things that went well for the launch of season 3. The first thing that went really well is I was not nearly as stressed as I was with the launch of season 2. Because I had just done this 6 months before, there were less questions and I just kind of knew what I was going to do, and it felt a little less hectic, which was really nice. Another thing that went well is my podcast trailer was just so much better than season 2's. I don't recommend it, but if you want a little laugh in your day, you can go back and watch my season 2 podcast trailer. It is not the prettiest thing that you will see on the internet. But season 3, I am so proud of that podcast trailer. And it was honestly so much fun to make because I was able to be creative and try new things and kind of get outside of my comfort zone a little bit. And one of the main things that got me out of my comfort zone is I used a quote from Jamie B. Golden from the interview that I did with her in that trailer because I'm just so proud of that interview. I don't know if I'm ever going to stop talking about it. So I wanted to include it in the podcast trailer to get people excited about it. So I am so very, very, very proud of that season 3 podcast trailer. And I think that is one thing that went really well with this podcast launch. Another thing that went really well for the season 3 podcast launch is I had a really pretty vision board that I created and shared that gave the vibe for season 3. And I am really proud of that too. It just makes me really happy every time I look at it. And it definitely shows the vibe that I'm going for season 3. So that was really fun to make. And I think it really helped my listeners to know what to expect from season 3. I'm sure there are more things that went well, but for today, for this episode, the last thing that went well that I want to talk about is I started talking about season 3 at the end of season 2. I told people to keep an eye out for season 3 coming in the spring. And then a month before the first episode of season 3 dropped, I was talking about it so that people could remember that I even exist, because I get it. There is so much content in the world every day, and just expecting people to remember that I exist is kind of ridiculous in the world that we live in. And so I made sure to start talking about season 3 a month before the first episode dropped so that people had time to remember who I was and to get excited with me about season 3. Okay, now we're going to talk about the things that didn't go so well, or according to my plan. So the first thing that didn't go well is my kids were sick the week the first episode of season 3 dropped. I had an extra kid home with me the week that the first episode dropped, 3 of the 5 days. I definitely had to be flexible. Another thing that didn't go as well is I unintentionally spread myself a little bit thinner than I was for season 2. I had several more things that I was juggling that I wasn't juggling for season 2. I created my first DIY course and soft launched it. I did several podcast Jumpstart sessions in the month of February before the first episode dropped. I'm also editing for another podcaster right now and honestly learning so much from her. I am so grateful for this opportunity, but it definitely adds another thing that I'm doing in my week that I wasn't doing before. So I was spread a little bit more thin. So I feel like in some aspects, I wasn't able to talk about season 3 as much as I hoped. I am the perfect example of sometimes you just don't have the capacity to talk about it, which is why one of the main things that I preach is starting the launch of your podcast a month before. So you've got some leeway when there's a day when you really just don't want to get on social media or you don't have time or capacity to do that. It isn't the end of the world that you couldn't get on social media because you've got another 2 weeks before your episode drops. So just giving yourself that window just makes it so much easier. And then the last thing that didn't go as well as I'd hoped for season 3 is looking back, I'm realizing that I didn't spend enough time figuring out the stories that I wanted to tell during this season 3 launch. I for sure wanted to talk about my interview with Jamie B. Golden, one of the hosts of the podcast with Knox and Jamie. And I feel like that is a story that I told often. But that was the only clear story. And I wish I would have had at least 1 or 2 more that I could have woven into my content talking about season 3. Because I have plenty of stories to tell, but I just didn't have a strategy to be telling those stories. And I'm realizing moving forward that I want to make sure that I have at least 3 stories to tell during your launch that can help you figure out your content and also just help people get excited about your podcast. And if you want some help figuring out what stories you should tell when you're launching your podcast, I have a free podcast launch calendar that can help you map out your launch and also figure out what stories you want to tell. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Before I tell you the main things that I learned from the launch of season 3, I'm going to take a second to talk about my podcast Jumpstart sessions. So you've been thinking about starting a podcast, but every time you think about actually starting, questions pop up. What mic do I need? How do I get my show on Apple Podcasts? What if I start and then get overwhelmed? I get it. Podcasting can feel super overwhelming, but that's exactly why I do free 30-minute podcast Jumpstart sessions. It's just you and me on a call chatting about your questions and figuring out what's actually holding you back. By the end, you'll know exactly what to do next. Plus, I'll send you my favorite mic recommendations, the best podcast hosting platforms, and your next 2 steps to get your show started. I only do a few of these calls each month, so grab yours before they're gone. Go to the link in the show notes to book your free podcast Jumpstart session. Let's make this podcast happen. Okay, before I tell you the main takeaways that I have from season 3, I wanted to tell you how many downloads my podcast trailer got and then my first episode of season 3 got. So first, my podcast trailer for season 3 got 48 downloads. And truly, I was hoping that would be a little bit higher. But it is what it is. And 48 people taking the time to listen to my podcast is pretty amazing. So in the end, I am excited about that number, even if I would like it to be a little bit higher. And then my first episode, which I called Honest Podcasting, My Numbers, My Break, and a Giveaway, had 57 downloads in the first week. I am super proud of that number. I had a goal that I didn't say out loud, so I guess it was a dream of my first episode having more downloads than my podcast trailer. And I reached that dream because I guess it's not a goal because I didn't write it down. But I'm really, really proud of myself. I'm really happy that so many people listened to that first episode. Those episodes that I put out in the first week where I get really vulnerable and tell you how many downloads I got and how much money I'm making and all of that. Those are definitely a labor of love and a lot of work. And so I'm just really glad that so many people have been able to listen to it and hopefully feel a little less alone in podcasting as they listen. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the main takeaways that I have learned from the launching of season 3. So the first takeaway is because I started a month before my first episode dropped, I was able to be flexible when my kids were sick. Truly, I do not think that my numbers would be where they ended up being if I had tried to start talking about season 3 the week that my first episode came out. No one would know it existed, quite honestly, because I took a break, which was very needed, and I definitely highly recommend taking a break. But the downside of taking a break is people sometimes forget that you exist. So giving yourself that month helps people to remember who you are, remember how awesome you are. And I know that because I took an entire month to launch season 3, I was able to get those numbers in an awesome place. And I was able to be super flexible when pretty much everyone in my household came down with some sort of illness. Another main takeaway is that I need some through line stories that I tell throughout the launch of a season. I kind of already touched on this, but looking back on it, I've realized that I need to be more intentional about the stories that I tell as I am launching a season. When I launched season 2, there were a lot of stories that I told that were really easy for me to figure out, if that makes sense. Like I was talking about why I decided to start talking about podcast coaching. I talked about the break that I took that I'd never done before. I talked about why doing a seasonal podcast was so essential. I had so many stories that I was telling during the launch of season 2, and I'm realizing that I have to be more intentional moving forward with launching each season so that I can take advantage of all of the good stories that I have. I just need a strategy so that I can tell them and help people to get excited about each season. One of the other main takeaways that I've learned from the launch of season 3 is having an experiment-minded perspective really helped me to see my download numbers that weren't exactly where I wanted them as just information instead of a reflection of my worth. And honestly, I'm really proud of that. That is something that is hard. It's hard when we live in a world that is very focused on being the best, quote unquote, and having really high download numbers and follower counts and all of those things. But I'm super, super proud of myself and really grateful for this perspective that I have of download numbers is just information. It has nothing to do with my worth. It has nothing to do with the good that I'm doing in the world. It's just information to help me to figure out how to reach the people that I want to help. And I am so proud of myself for having that mindset because I did not have that mindset for a very long time. So go me. And then the last takeaway that I have that I learned from the launch of season 3 is stretching my creative muscle really helped me to have more fun with my podcast trailer and helped me to be way more excited about sharing about my podcast trailer. Like I said, when I was talking about the podcast trailer for season 2, I was not very excited about sharing about it because it was just not my greatest work. It was not very pretty. It got the job done. But I feel like this time for season 3's launch, I was so excited to tell everyone about it. And I shared about it more on social media, more in stories, on threads, all of those things, because I was super proud of it. And I was proud of how I stretched and tried something new. So the takeaway for me is when I am creative, when I try new things, when I put myself out there and stretch, most of the time, first of all, it's going to be a better product. And second of all, I'm going to be more excited to talk about it and share about it. So I might as well do those stretching creative things so that I can be more excited about it. So then I talk about it more, which means the likelihood of more people listening is higher. That feels like a win. As I'm wrapping up this episode, here's the one thing you should implement in your podcast if you're feeling overwhelmed and not sure where to start. As you are launching your podcast or launching the next season of your podcast, the most important thing for you to remember is that your worth is separate from your download numbers. Like I was saying just a second ago,
This is a lesson that was really hard for me to learn. And to be completely honest, it has changed the game for me. Now that I intrinsically know that my worth has nothing to do with my download numbers, I am so much more confident and I am so much faster at making change and seeing the information and looking at it without getting emotional about it. It's a game changer. And don't get me wrong, I still have moments when I look at download numbers and I think, why are they not growing faster? Or maybe I should just quit because my numbers aren't where I want them to be. My numbers aren't where Susie's podcast numbers are. But now that I have trained my brain to think of download numbers as just information and having nothing to do with my worth, I'm able to work through that faster and get back to improving my show so that I can help as many people as possible. So the takeaway is download numbers are just information. They in no way reflect if you are an awesome person or not. They just tell you if the things you tried during that launch or in that episode or for your podcast worked or not. Will you share this episode with your friend who started working on her podcast but got stuck somewhere between starting and launching her show? This episode will help her get ready and excited to launch her own podcast. In next week's episode, I talk about how the first month of season 3 of the Friendly Podcast Guide went, how many downloads each episode got, and how the experiments went that I tried this month. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week.